Hello, art teachers. In this video, I will be going over my needlework curriculum that covers kindergarten through high school. This will only be very superficial coverage, introducing some of the different projects you can do and skills that you can teach. I will be making separate videos on each individual project and skill, and also a more in-depth sort of Q&A video that explains all the different fabrics, needles, threads, and equipment that you need. This video will illustrate in the broadest terms the kind of projects you can be doing, the kind of materials you will need, and talking about why I think this is important and what your students can learn. I go in age order, so the easier stuff will be in the beginning and the more complex stuff in the end if you want to jump ahead. So I am a needleworker in my own practice. I am an elementary art teacher, so I teach K-5, and my lessons are 50 minutes. We're working through increasing skill, so as I said, it's going to get more complex as we go on. Even though I teach kindergarten through 5th, I also, outside of school, teach older kids, and I have a lot of experience teaching needlework to adults. So I'm going to give you the whole gamut all the way with ideas you can use up through high school. I'm not going to be covering weaving, knitting, or crochet. Those are all important fiber arts, but this is specifically needlework. So this is why I think it's important to include needlework and other fiber arts in a school art curriculum. Handling a needle and thread is a basic life skill. Even if they never pursue this as an art medium, it's a good thing if they can sew on a button and hem their pants. The skills build from year to year. So even at the most basic kindergarten lesson, they are learning a useful skill. And if they choose to pursue it, there are many avenues of fine art that use these skills. The students love it. It's a 3D project and it builds confidence, and the students really like making a thing, especially those who thought it was going to be difficult. It's culturally relevant in that every culture around the world does needlework. And it's historically relevant because needlework is just about as old as wearing clothes. Weaving's a little older, but needlework comes right behind. Now, there are hundreds of different kinds of needle arts. We can't begin to cover them all. But this curriculum has a good sampling of all the basic techniques that an artist needs to move on from being a beginner to more advanced skills to actually pursuing it in a more sophisticated art practice. As I said, I'm a needleworker. I actually do a lot of fiber art in my own practice, and these are some of the things that I have done over the years. You can see I really have a wide variety of skills. Now, how old should you start to teach needlework? I start with my kindergartners with lacing. Now, in this particular picture, this was a group of students for summer camp that this group was supposed to be 5 through 7. And this is the first time that I taught embroidery or applique to young children. As I said, it was supposed to be. 5 to 7. However, this little guy is actually 4. I had talked to the camp managers about this child being too young to be in this class. But he was determined, and this kid is using an actual sharp needle and thread and embroidery hoop, and he was really into it. I don't recommend you start teaching this to preschoolers, but this kid did it. So let's move on to how I actually teach in my classroom. In kindergarten, we start with lacing. So lacing we do for one lesson, and what I'm wanting them to learn here is just a basic putting the thread in and out of the holes in a line. I want them to learn to pull the string all the way through. What beginning stitchers want to do is sort of wiggle it through like a snake, one hole at a time, and then pull it through all the holes at once, and that does not work. So I'm trying to get the students to pull the stitch all the way through. The supplies you'll need for this are paper plates, a hole punch. I like to pre-punch the holes so it goes more quickly. You want to get tipped laces. So see on the ends of these yarns how they have tips on them just like shoelaces. You can get these through most of the art supply catalogs and from Amazon. Having tipped laces makes all the difference in the world for this being easy and successful. And of course you'll need scissors and paper and coloring tools. If you have lacing cards, that's a great way to start. I wouldn't say buy lacing cards just for this, but I like to use them in my room. So the lacing cards are just a toy. This is not something they're going to keep, but this is something you put in and take out with the tipped laces. This is a great video to show them. I show this every year. She doesn't do any talking. It's just music, and she just laces up the whole card and takes it out. She does the running stitch and the whip stitch. Before we do anything, I have the students do one of these cards, put it all the way in, and this is important, take it all the way out. Big lacing, big holes, it works for their hands, and it's colorful and fun. And this is going to build that basic skill of in and pulling it all the way through. When they've done this, laced it all up and pulled it all out, then we can go on to the project that they get to keep and take home. When we get to the actual projects, there are a number of projects that you can choose from. I like to do something very similar to this one on YouTube, this paper plate lacing. You can decorate the plate any way you want, before or after, and you can do simple round and a circle stitching, which I like, or some of these more complicated things. I like to let them just do their thing rather than having a specific end goal, because I don't want them to get frustrated or hung up on doing it a specific way or doing it right. I just want them to have the satisfaction of adding string to their project and seeing that it is easy and fun. As in all art media, I find that when people have been frustrated on their first project or shut down, very early on, of not doing it correctly, they tend to be very resistant to trying it in the future, especially as adults. So I don't want that, so we make it as easy as can be, and then they get to take this home. In first grade, we are also going to be doing lacing, this time on plastic canvas. Again, this is one lesson. Our target skills are a running or a whip stitch, and I don't care which they do or if they go back and forth. Sometimes they worry if they've made their stitch wrong. I do not care. They can make patterns, they can change colors, and again, I want them to learn that they have got to pull that stitch all the way through. They can't make 3 stitches with one end and then try to pull the whole thing through. Again, you're going to need basic supplies. Plastic canvas you can buy in sheets. That's the cheapest way, but I like to buy it in these different shapes. And as you can see, you want to take a close look at just how big those holes are. The bigger holes are going to be much easier for them. The smaller holes will still work, but the bigger holes are better. You're going to need those tip laces, as I said. You could also use plastic lacing. This round lacing is better than the flat lacing. This is called sketty. It doesn't pull through quite as smoothly, but it's an option. Again, with the first graders, we start with the lacing card, so we just get the idea of in and out and pulling it all the way through. We have this nice video of the lacing, and it also makes them feel very confident, because when I show them this video and the lacing card, they, do you think you can do this? Oh, of course I can do that. That's so easy. We did this last year. Really building up that confidence. Then I let them pick their colors, pick them shapes, and then lace however they want. And as you can see, it comes out very differently. Some students are really tuned in to getting every hole. Some students are doing a pattern. Some people are just being expressive with colors everywhere. I'm encouraging expression and experimentation, and if it doesn't work, well, just take it out. You need to use your scissors? That's okay. I want them to feel that stitching is easy and fun. They really love this, and most of them end up putting it on a string around their neck and wearing it out of the classroom as a necklace, even if they just made a rectangle. Moving along to second grade, now we're going to start with actual needles. And our first project is going to be embroidery. We do our embroidery for usually 3 lessons. The first week is just practicing with the tools, and so that's 2 weeks to actually do their stitching after that. The target skills we're adding this year is we're using an embroidery hoop. They're going to have to use a needle and thread their needle. They're going to have to tie a knot. And we're just basically doing a running stitch, which is the in and out stitch, nothing fancy. For basic stitching, you're going to need your basic art supplies. Scissors, markers are good. You're going to need cloth. And I recommend just simple, cheap cotton. The kind that bed sheets are made out of. Cast off men's shirts make great material. This is usually pretty inexpensive to buy. If you know anyone who does quilting or sewing, they're likely to have a lot of scraps for you. You're going to need an embroidery hoop for every student in the class. The embroidery hoop is just a tool. It is not a permanent frame. So you don't need one for everyone in the grade level. You only need it for enough people in that classroom. And you're going to need sharp needles. When you buy needles, they're either going to say sharps or blunt. Sharps are what you need. Blunt needles will not poke through the fabric. Don't get plastic needles for this. The number one frustration I have heard from art teachers trying to teach needlework is they're using inappropriate materials. They're using blunt needles to go through tightly woven fabric, thinking that that's going to be safer or easier for the children. But if the needle does not go through the fabric, it is not easier and it's not safe. There are other projects we'll use with blunt needles. This, you need sharp needles. And when you're looking for a needle, you want to buy a tapestry needle. That really talks about the size. Little sewing needles are going to be too small for their fingers. So you want a tapestry needle that's going to be big enough for their fingers and have a big enough eye. And the thread that I recommend is pearl cotton. You can also use embroidery floss, but that divides into 6 individual strands. It can be trickier to use, and regular sewing thread is too fine. So pearl cotton, which is also like a thin crochet, it's not going to fray, it's pretty, it's strong, perfect for this age level. So now we want to have the talk. I do this before all of my needlework projects from 2nd grade to 5th. And of course, by the time they get to 5th, it's much shortened because they have learned it by now. So the first thing we're going to look at is the embroidery hoop. So we talk about the job of each tool. Now the job of the embroidery hoop is to hold the cloth straight and tight so you can stitch easily. And I pass out an embroidery hoop to everyone. And I show that it has 2 parts, an inside ring and an outside ring. It's also got this little screw on top. Now I would like everyone, put your thumbs in there and take that ring apart. You might have to undo that screw a little. So we practice taking the hoop apart and putting it together. Apart and putting it together. While they're doing that, I come around the room and I give them the pre-cut squares of cloth we're going to use. Now, this is going to be your cheapest, ugliest stuff. This is just for our practice class. This is not going to be anything interesting that you have for your project. A plain cotton weave is going to be fine. Then we practice, I demonstrate how we put the fabric in the hoop and tighten that screw and get it nice and tight. It should sound like a drum because they all want to hit it like a drum, and then they're going to all put it on their head. That's okay. We're getting familiar with the tools. So we're going to open it up, close it, put the fabric in, take the fabric out, put it on our head, beat it like a drum. Next, we're going to talk about the needle. I've got some giant needles that I hold up in the front of the room for everyone to see. So I demonstrate. And let's talk about being careful with your needle. So when you get your needle, it is going to be on a noodle. Now the noodles are just little squares of foam that I cut out of pool noodles. Cut those into little squares, and when you hand out the needles, they all are going to be stuck in a piece of foam. And at the end of the class, when you bring back your needle, it's going to be in your noodle. You could color code the needle noodles by table. It's also very easy to write numbers on those noodles to keep track of making sure that you're always getting them back. And what I say is, kindergartners come in this room, and we don't want any kindergartners finding these needles and poking themselves. Now, as far as them poking each other, I say, now raise your hand if you know how to use scissors, which everybody does. Do you ever stab your neighbor with your scissors? No, nobody ever. Of course not, because you know how to use scissors. You are also not going to poke anyone with these needles, and you're not going to poke yourself. If we have any problem with anyone poking themselves or each other, then we will have to put the needles away. And it's always good to put this on your administration too. If we lose needles or have trouble poking needles, then Principal so-and-so is not going to let me have needles anymore. Now, I've been saying this every year. I do have problems with lost needles, but I've never had a problem with poking or playing with the needles. The needle has 2 jobs. One end, the pointy end, is to poke a hole. That's why it's pointy. And the other end, the eye, is to hold the thread and to pull it all the way through the fabric. Putting the thread through the hole, through the eye, is called threading the needle. It's not that hard to do. You need to learn to do this yourself. Now, I can help you, but you're going to have to wait in line. Now, let's see how many of there are you and how many of me. So if you can do this yourself, you don't have to wait in line. And I always encourage them to help each other. So if there's somebody at your table that's good at doing this and you're not, help each other. That way, you don't have to wait in a long line for me to thread your needle. The difficulty in threading a needle comes from not having the right size needle and the right size thread. If you have thread that is too big for the eye of your needle, then everybody's going to be frustrated. If you're using a thread that frays easily, like trying to put a yarn through the needle, people are going to be frustrated. If you get a large eye tapestry needle and use that pearl cotton, it's going to be easy for a second grader to thread. Most of the class is going to be able to do that pretty easily. For some reason, tying the knot is harder. You know, kids don't learn to tie their shoes before they come to school the way they should. So a lot of them have struggles with tying the knot. Again, I will help you do that. But if you learn to do it yourself, it's going to be a lot easier. There are videos on YouTube to demonstrate different tricks for threading the needle and also different tricks for tying the knot. Use whatever tricks you like or show them the videos. Another option is that you could pre-thread all the needles for them before you put them on the noodles, whatever works for you. The knot has one job. It is to stop the thread from coming through the cloth. Sometimes I even illustrate, I point to the needle, the front of the needle, that is the go end, and the knot is the stop end. And I'll put my hands up in the stop, so they know the knot does not, you don't want to put the knot on the needle because you don't want to stop the needle from going through. The knot goes on the end. That is a chronic mistake that beginners make who don't understand how needles work. That they put the knot on the needle because they think the job of the knot is to keep it on the needle. But that is just going to cause problems for you because, of course, the knot is stopping it. Don't put the knot on the needle. I teach them to do this with a single threaded needle that is one knot on the end of one string so that as you work, the thread is sliding through. If you think you need it, and sometimes I do this for my special education kids, I will double knot it, which is I will tie both of those strings together at the end. This is going to keep their needle from coming off, but I want to set them up with the skills that are going to carry through all the way through all the projects. So I really don't like double knotting, but again, whatever works for you. In order to stop the thread from coming off the needle, and this is something, it's going to come off everybody's needle at first, don't worry, is that you need to pinch that eye. When you pull that thread through the fabric, when it gets to the other side, put your fingers right on that eye, and that is what is going to keep that thread from falling off. Now, you're going to have kids that, it keeps falling off, and so I will demonstrate with them. No, it's not falling off. You're pulling it off. So let's watch. And so you demonstrate pulling it through and see how that thread is sliding. Put your finger right on it and see that's going to stop it. And then we move to the basic running stitch. Now, this is for the second grade embroidery project. We spend a whole class just on the hoop, the fabric, the needle, the knotting, and then doing some stitches. Now, one thing you can do is just draw, say a line on that fabric, with a pencil or a marker, and just have them stitch on that line, or you can stitch around the edge of the hoop. We don't care about mistakes. We don't care how many times we have to pull it out and start over. It's okay. Everybody does it. We want to work towards getting small, regular stitches. Then you can take all that work off the hoop, put your needle back in your noodle, return that. Everything else, you can take that home with you or throw it away. Put the hoops back in the hoop boxes. Then the next day, we're going to use those same skills and we are going to do our embroidery. Now, you could have them all doing the same thing, a simple shape like a heart or a flower. I really like to let them do whatever they want. And you can see there's just a wide variety of skill levels here. And every one of them is A-OK. In the bottom right corner, the student has used a stencil to color a picture, and he's just sort of stitching right on top of that. In the bottom middle, the student has done a beautiful job drawing out that flower and using different colors to color in that picture. In the top middle, they use a stencil to draw a heart, and they're making huge stitches. You know, I try to get them to make smaller, more regular stitches, but if they're getting the basic idea, if they're practicing making the stitches, threading, knotting, that's good enough for me. Some of this is fabric, some of this is felt. If you're going to use the felt, you just have to open up that hoop a little bit wider. It can be a little bit harder to put that felt in the hoop, but it's a nice surface to stitch on. And here's another look at some of the many results that we get. Letters are great, stencils are great. These may not all look like great finished works, but I can tell you every one of these students was very happy with the job they did. All right, let's move on to third grade. Same basic skills, but this time we're adding another layer. We spend 2 to 3 lessons on this. The target skills, again, we're using the hoop, threading the needle, tying the knot. This time we're adding, putting 2 layers on, cutting, pinning. You're going to need the same supplies you need before. I like to use felt for this, for the shape they're going to cut out. Stencils are good. You'll need some pins, good sewing scissors. We start with that same talk about the hoop and the needle and everything. And then they cut out shapes of felt, pin them to their fabric, or I usually help them pin it. And then they use the running stitch or a whip stitch to attach those 2 layers together. If you want to display this work on a bulletin board, after you take it out of the hoop, it's real easy to fold it around a piece of foam core and either tape it on the back or pin it on the sides. Then maybe put a ribbon on the top. It makes a real pretty finished product. Here's some examples of my third graders' finished work. You can see I encourage them to use their imagination, different colors, different styles, whatever interests them. In fourth grade, we're going to change it up a little. Crewel is a type of embroidery. We're going to spend 3 or 4 lessons on this. The new stitch we're doing is a satin stitch, and that's that big stitch is really coloring in areas. This is more like painting with thread. They're going to be doing more design with this because they're going to be painting or drawing more of a picture before they start, and then they're going to color that in with thread. And also we're going to be stitching without a hoop. If you're using a softer fabric, you could still use a hoop, but I like to use burlap, and that is stiff enough for them to use without a hoop, especially as we reinforce the sides with the masking tape. You're going to need burlap or another fabric. You need a loose weave fabric. You can see the holes there. You can see right through there. Masking tape for the edges because this frays really easily. And for this, we're going to use blunt needles. You can see that the end of that needle has a rounded end there. We don't need the sharp because we don't need to poke through the fabric because the holes are already there. This is a time that a plastic needle would work, but you want to check the plastic needle that it doesn't have a really wide eye. Some of them have like big bubble-shaped eyes, and that's just too big to go through even with the holes in the fabric. And yarn is what we're going to be stitching with here. Again, this is the importance of matching the string to the needle. Blunt needles are going to have a big enough eye to get the yarn through, and folding the yarn in half makes it slip through a lot more easily. We use yarn because it's bulkier and it's going to fill up these areas a lot more quickly than your finer pearl cotton. Here are some examples of girls who have just drawn simple shapes and are then filling those in, just like coloring in, but using the yarn. And here we actually painted with tempera first. Now these are works in progress. I took the pictures because we were running out of time, and eventually when they're finished, the masking tape will come off and they'll trim that up a little straighter, and the paint will keep it from fraying. I sent them home with these supplies because we ran out of time and they were doing such a good job. Tempera is a good paint to use because the needle is still going to go through it very smoothly even after it's painted, whereas acrylic's a little too plasticky and it might be difficult to punch the needle through. Kids like doing crewel because it's bigger and bolder and thicker than the finer embroidery. Some students find that easier to handle, and some students just like the bolder look and the combining it with paint. In 5th grade, we move on to sewing. And the difference between sewing and stitching is sewing is what we call it when you're making a construction, when you're putting 2 pieces of things together to make not a flat picture, but a 3-dimensional thing. We spent 2 to 3 lessons on this, and our target skills are design. A number of examples of things that I have made, and we talk about making a pattern, the 3D construction, making your own decisions, figuring out how many pieces were used, thinking about beforehand, what are you going to make and how are you going to make it? Supplies, you're going to need paper. Felt is really good for this, much easier than fabric for doing this three-dimensional sewing. You want to use good scissors. If you're using dull scissors, they're just going to chew up the felt and it's going to be very frustrating. Sharp needles for this. And the thread, again, we're going to use the pearl cotton. And you'll need some pins to hold it together. Planning is the main point of this project. What are you going to make? How big will it be? How many pieces will it take? So they have to make a pattern before they cut out any felt. And sometimes they make their pattern bigger than the felt pieces. And so, okay, so you don't have felt this big. What are you going to do to resize this to make it work? And here are some of the things that my fifth graders have made. Some inspired by my samples and some entirely on their own. This is stuffed with pillow stuffing. It is actually cheaper to buy pillows at Walmart and stuff it with that than it is to buy polyfiber fill from the fabric store. The polyfiber fill is the same stuff and it'll cost you about 4 times as much than if you just go buy it at the Walmart and take it out of a pillow. So you can see all different levels of skill here, different ideas, and the personal satisfaction they have from making something this way is terrific. And so this is where I stop in the 5th grade. This has given them skills that is going to last a lifetime. What have we accomplished? They have learned to use the basic tools, some specific skills, and they have used transferable skills, specifically pattern making, planning, 3D construction, in addition to just, the basic stitching technique. We've built a lot of self-confidence that they're going to be able to use these skills in the future just as basic life skills, but also to pursue more fiber art. But let's go further. Here are some other projects that you can do beyond my K-5 lineup. Recycled plush toys. I like to use socks for this. This is very easy because they don't have to construct the whole thing. They just have to put a drawstring bottom on it. Again, stuffed with polyfiber fill. Combination of wrapping, sewing, gluing. I do this in summer camp sometimes. This is a great 3D project that results in a stuffed animal. Of course, who doesn't love that? On the higher end, this is actually my business. This is a product that I make and sell through galleries throughout the United States. These are made with recycled sweaters. T-shirts and sweaters are excellent sources of fabric because it's so easy to sew with, doesn't fray, can be done with a machine, easily can be hand stitched. So for your middle school and your high school students that want to do more advanced 3-dimensional sculpture using fabric, t-shirts and sweaters are great material. Cross stitch. Cross stitch is a wonderful math project. I would recommend this for skilled upper level elementary, but also middle school and high school, especially if you have them draw the pattern themselves. The key to cross stitch is mapping out that pattern on a grid in blocks and then filling that in just with little X's, cross stitch on the fabric. The actual stitch is not difficult at all. The challenge is in transferring, and it's called counted cross stitch because there's no markings on the fabric. You have to actually count those blocks. So a very simple version would be this little duckling. A very complicated version would be this picture I did of myself. What makes it complicated is the size of the squares, the number of different colors you're using, and the number of squares across. This duck is only 15 squares top to bottom, whereas this one of me top to bottom is, like 150, something like that. Same skill, just becomes more advanced the smaller and larger you go. Needlepoint, related, but it's done on a different kind of fabric or canvas, and it can also be done on plastic canvas using usually a thicker yarn. And this has not only the mathematical aspect of following a chart, but you can see it has all different kinds of stitches. You get a lot of variety in the length and angle of stitches. And this is great for building up complex patterns. And needlepoint has a great history around the world in that different cultures have different patterns and different stitches. So there are stitches that are regional and ethnically specific. So if you're wanting to teach world art using stitchery, needlepoint is a great angle. And again, this isn't mine. I got this one off the internet. You can check that out. I love doing recycled fashion with teenagers. These are just 2 books of probably a dozen that I have. Again, we're using knit material that doesn't fray, is so easy to cut. It can be machine sewn or hand sewn really easily and is not going to be a problem to leave raw edges. You don't have to have everything finished and hemmed. Plus, using Goodwill or Salvation Army purchases or hand-me-downs, you can have a lot of materials and afford to make a lot of mistakes. This is a great project idea if you've got high school students who want to do some fashion projects, but you don't have sewing machines. These books and many others have fantastic ideas of things you can do with this. A very trendy form of needlework right now is needlework journaling. And so what you do with this is you have a big piece of cloth that you put just a tiny little doodle on every day, every week. It can be calendar based or theme based, and it's just stitching little memories like a diary. And it doesn't need to be interpreted by anyone else. It can just be meaningful for the maker. And this is something that I think middle school and high school students would really enjoy. Sort of like a sketchbook or a writing journal, but with stitchery. It's also very affordable. Hoops cost a couple of dollars, and all the materials necessary for this are easily obtainable at any Walmart. You could do a needlework journal for less than $10 a year. Quilting. On the left, we have very simple basic quilting with some embroidery on top, which of course is a great American folk art. You know, it's great for art history and connecting to ancestors. Almost everybody has a quilt in their house. But it's also increasingly recognized as a fine art. This Lisa Butler piece here on the right, this is museum quality stuff. You're not going to get to this in your K-12 education, but you can point them in that direction. This quilt, fantastic as it is using the exact same skills that I introduced in the 2nd grade embroidery and 3rd grade applique. It's just an extension of those same skills. This can also be combined with painting or markers or drawing on the fabric. Stitching can be the basis or an accent, which brings us to mixed media. Needlework can be combined with other media. This is all my work. And you can see I use my stitching on top of photographs. I use it with buttons and beads. These little squares here, those aren't excerpts of something else. That's the whole thing. Each one of those is wrapped around a wooden block for an exhibition I take part of every year called 4x4, and it's 4 4-inch blocks. Here on the right, you can see I've used antique linens and photographs, embroidery, and applique. And this sort of fiber art is increasingly recognized in the fine art world, whereas much of it was, previously in past generations, perhaps overlooked as a lesser folk art. I think this trend is kind of over at this point. Yarn bombing, and again, this is knit or crochet, which I'm not going into in this video, but I guess for about 10 years, this is a real international sensation, this yarn bombing, a sort of graffiti with fiber. This can be either taken on as a campus beautification project. You can look up and see really fantastic works of people who have covered cars or bicycles or houses. Or you can look at it as, the negative impacts of this sort of thing, in that most of this stuff is acrylic. And although it looks really good when you first put it on, it does not age well and gets very ratty very quickly. But fiber art as public art is a good contemporary subject to explore. Now, let's look around the world. Japanese thread balls. This is a great math project. This is 3-dimensional geometry at work. I have made some of these and they're tricky, but also very adjustable in complexity. So if you've got someone that's interested in 3-dimensional geometric forms, get them started on this. I collect these molas from Panama. They're made by a very specific tribe down in Panama, and these are 19th and 20th century adaptations of the artwork that they used to actually tattoo on their bodies. But when the missionaries came and Christianity came and sort of stamped that out, the women invented, using these new textiles from Europe and America, they invented this new artwork using these traditional patterns, and they now use these as dress fronts. Now, this technique is far too fine for me and far too fine to teach class, but you can adapt these ideas. This is how I adapted the Panamanian mola when I was teaching on a cruise ship a couple of years ago. Even if you are not authentically replicating sophisticated techniques, you can still take inspiration and adapt that to simpler techniques and materials in your classroom while looking at that traditional art forms around the world. Likewise, the Chilean arpillera, also something I learned to do to teach on a cruise ship and have since been asked to give public lectures about. The arpillera may look very sweet and simple, but it is actually an invention as a form of protest art to condemn the Chilean dictatorship in the 1970s. So it really has a fascinating tie-in to contemporary 20th century politics and history and political repression and a grassroots public arts response to that repression. Like the Panamanians, the Hawaiians had a traditional art form. They would make designs similar to this either as tattoos or in their mud cloth. But when the missionaries came and introduced cotton and fine needles and stitching, the Hawaiians had no actual stitching culture before this. They adapted these designs, specifically radial symmetry, into fantastically complex quilting. And again, I developed this lesson for teaching on a cruise. Using the simpler materials, the simpler techniques, we can explore the concepts of the simple shapes and patterns and the radial symmetry in creating something inspired by something from another culture. So there you have it. Everything from kindergarten lacing all the way up to the fine arts around the world. If you start with a needle and thread, you can use those same basic skills to do amazing things. And if you teach your kids, they're going to be able to go on to do amazing things, or just to fix their jacket, which is good too. I am posting my entire curriculum online on my Heidi How channel. And although this is the first of my needlework presentations, it will not be my last. I am going to give detailed tutorials on all of these projects, plus a basic overview of all the different kinds of needles and fabrics that you will use. And I'm more than happy to answer all of your needlework in education questions. So I'm Heidi How, and that's my needlework curriculum.